Well, I think the Varèse was so strange. The stuff that he did do with percussion and sirens and, you know, all that was very strange. I think that excited him because he couldn't understand it right off the bat, you know.
The extraordinary thing about Varèse in his essay on ionization is the fact that it's almost entirely written for percussion instruments. So any sense of melody, harmony is removed from the music, and one simply has the timbres of the individual percussion instruments, their collective barbarism, if you like, and the absolute focus on rhythm in terms of projecting the music forward. This must have been an astonishing experience for Zappa in his teens, discovering this music. And certainly it's the percussive aspects of Varèse's work that stick out most obviously in Zappa's own music.
Music is rhythmic and complicated, and it's doing things with rhythm that are very, very exciting if you're a drummer or you're interested in rhythm. And Zappa heard that straight away, and for him there wasn't a big division between liking that and liking the extraordinary quintuplets he heard on a Doo Wop record. He heard them in the same way. For him, these genres and separations didn't really exist. It's one music. So the quote, "The present-day composer refuses to die," became a kind of slogan for him about how to approach the classical legacy, that you approach it on your own terms, you grab what you like from it and you celebrate it.
Not only would Varèse's quote become synonymous with Zappa, but the Frenchman's artistic philosophy would also prove to be highly influential.
Varèse was very good at perpetuating his own myths, as were many composers, and therefore the idea that Varèse is this completely isolated individual with no connection to any kind of musical establishment, I think has to be treated with a certain degree of suspicion. Varèse did certainly rely, as do most other composers, on various kinds of income supply, whether it's commissions, royalties from performances, support from individuals, and so on and so forth. However, he did perpetuate the image of being very much out there and by himself. And I think that that aesthetic view that he tried to cultivate of the composer as rugged individualist must have been something that influenced Zappa. Zappa is almost unique among so-called rock musicians in the fact that he acts very much as a composer, as an auteur, rather than as a member of a band. He writes the music, he hires the musicians to play it, he rehearses them to the point of exhaustion, he expects total commitment, but he sees them in a sense simply as employees. And this is very much the attitude of the rugged individualist modernist composer. Whether that's a good way to deal with people, I don't know. But it was certainly Varèse's way, and it was something that Zappa very much followed, even in the early years with the Mothers of Invention.
Yet although Zappa was drawing inspiration from these composers, his own music was often firmly rooted in a rock idiom, and so this classical influence was synthesized in such ways that it could never be dismissed as obvious or simply imitative.
I don't really hear much of that in there. I think he just brought that kind of texture or those kind of ideas of writing more complicated lines, and that was it. He wasn't trying to reproduce Pulcinella or Rite of Spring or anything like that, but the feel of it and bringing that kind of idea of writing into specifically right into the rock and roll area. That he did, for sure, but he didn't, it wasn't like you'd suddenly be listening to a rock and roll tune thinking, oh, well, now I'm listening to something that is rock and roll, but why is it sounding like Stravinsky? It just never did that, ever.
He wasn't taking anybody else's work, he was taking maybe the style, but he created in his own way his own version of what it was. And funny enough, he made it sort of palatable for other people to listen to. He wanted to make it in such a way that he would force people to listen to it, incorporate it into the work, and make it so that it was an essential part of the album, that you wouldn't take the needle off the record and say, oh, I don't want to listen to this, let me jump to track 2. No, that was part of it. You cannot imagine listening to the album without that. And that's the key to the whole thing.
Over time, however, it became clear to certain listeners that there were more direct references to Zappa's heroes within the music itself, often hidden and reproduced in entirely different musical settings.
I think the most blatant example is probably on Absolutely Free, where there's a bit out of Petrushka on Status Pack Baby, and there's an excerpt from Holst, which leads into the invocation and ritual dance of the young pumpkin. I think that if Frank Zappa had quoted from Beethoven or Mozart or somebody like that, it would have been instantly recognisable. Although I do think that people recognise when he quoted from Holst on Absolutely Free. But I mean, otherwise, it wasn't obvious. I mean, particularly on something like Uncle Me, in which the very title track was lifted from Milhaud's An Homme et son désir. It might not have been an exact plagiarism. I think he just about got away with it. But I mean, I don't think that the standard sort of average rock fan would have been aware of that.
There are quotes here and there, but all of those quotes, like in the Duke of Prunes, I introduced those, basically because I knew them, and Zappa got a kick out of, having me play them. I mean, most of that stuff was done in concert first, and then done, like on the album later.
Well, looking at it at the time, it was just playing those pieces or those parts of those pieces because Frank thought that they were important music and he liked them and just wanted to include them in the show.
Part of the job we had playing in the band was to make Frank laugh. And those kinds of things always made him laugh, The juxtaposition of Stravinsky against a song about a Duke of Prunes.
You can do research and find quotations from classical composers in Frank Zappa's oeuvre, but these kind of spot the quote kind of pedantic things people point out, I think miss the point, because when you first hear the record, you're not aware of that. It's the result of subsequent research, and I think it'd be a bit silly to justify Frank Zappa because of these quotations. But he wasn't trying to lead people in a classical direction. He had no pretensions.